Hello, 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 and a very warm welcome on a truly horrifically cold day. No, that's hyperbole. It's not that bad. It's just really rainy and horrid. But you know what? I'm allowed to be dramatic. So yes, a warm welcome on a moderately cold day, and welcome back to The Library is Open. So I hope you brought your library card, my darling. Rubbish tone pop back in action. We're not playing games now. This is the first new video of the month, which is of course November. Oh my goodness, how is it November? Oh, the nights are drawing in, etc. Lots of other things British people love saying. That little wind-up toys on me, you know, like those Woodies on Toy Story where you pull the back. And those are our staple phrases. But let's embrace the culture, shall we? So what you may not know is that on Booktube, which I suppose I'm kind of part of, that November is known as non-fiction November, and I have decided that actually that would be a really cool thing to get involved with. So my plan is to do 4 videos for the month. It's 4 weeks in November, right? Maybe there's 5, I don't know. Whatever number there are, and to dedicate those, not my bonus episodes, not my special ones or anything, but just the ones where I talk about specific books. I want to dedicate those November videos to non-fiction titles, because sort of looking back over my channel and so on and so forth, and the books that I've talked about, there have been a couple of non-fiction ones, but nothing really sort of, not really with any kind of regularity, and I know that some people do enjoy them. And I think that's kind of understandable in a way because, you know, my natural default or go-to is fiction. You know, it's just a personal preference. I would always probably opt for fiction over non-fiction, with some exceptions. But I thought this could be a really great opportunity to, you know, expand the variety of books that I'm talking about and maybe appeal to you lovely person, if you're a big fan of non-fiction. So I'm going to let that be quite loose in terms of what non-fiction means for the channel. So it definitely will contain memoir, autobiography, as well as more sort of traditionally non-fiction texts. I was looking through my books today on my TBR pile, and actually there's not that many non-fiction ones. So I mean, I may already have full month's worth of video ideas. So that's great. And it will force me to read them, which is also good. There we go. Anyway, this first one that I want to talk about this episode is a really interesting one, and I wasn't sure how to make this video to begin with, because I thought I'd probably have either nothing to say, I don't mean nothing, but you know, nothing new to say, or lots to say. So it may either be normal length or it may be longer, just depending on how I feel. And you know, I think that I could have sat and puzzled that out for ages and really overstressed about it, so I'm just going to talk, because I finished it in a day, and while it's still fresh in my head, let's just get on to it. So the book in question is This Little Beauty. Can we appreciate the outfit on the cover? It's Vivienne Westwood, I believe, with Doc Martens. And this is Will Young's To Be a Gay Man. Now I'll just read you the very first bit of the front flap, just to give you a kind of overview of what this is. It says, in To Be a Gay Man, Will Young speaks out about gay shame, revealing the impact it had on his own life, how he learned to deal with it, and how he can now truthfully say he is gay and happy. So, Will Young, just in case you're not aware, because although he's a famous person, there's no reason you necessarily would be, is, or rather was, the winner of the very first ever Pop Idol, which at its peak was attracting audiences of like 14 million. Particularly the final, which he was in with Gareth Gates, and which he obviously, as I've said, subsequently won. And a few short days after winning, he gave an interview in which he was very open about his sexuality, which he hadn't discussed on the show or anything. And since then, his career's done really, really well, quite diverse. He's still releasing music. He's been in the West End, on other theatrical projects, and he co-hosts a podcast called Homo Sapiens, which is sort of lots of different queer content from a contemporary kind of viewpoint, which is lovely. And obviously now he's written this memoir. Now I really wanted to get this, and indeed I talked about it in my most anticipated books video. Not just because I am pretty much a fan of Will Young, I think he's really nice and very talented, but also because of the subject that it was covering. Now, my sort of relation to that, I suppose, is not only being, a queer person or gay man, whichever you want to say, both. I also did my master's in gender, sexuality and culture at the University of Manchester, and so, sort of thinking about issues around gender, sexuality, identity, things that I enjoy. Is enjoy the right word? Things that I sort of like to think about critically, or from both an academic and a sociological standpoint. Just because I think it's really interesting to interrogate ideas and concepts in a relatively safe space. Well, it's my head, so safe space is possibly over egging the pudding a bit, but I like to think about things as in terms of like thought experiments, but also in terms of how we can apply that to real life somatic experience, for people who whatever the issue do have those as things in their everyday lives as much as them being theoretical concepts. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, I guess. I probably explained that terribly badly, but there we go. Now, the concept of gay shame is something I was already kind of familiar with from a previous book I'd read as part of my MA, and it's something I've had conversations about with a close friend who'd also read the book. And that book was called The Velvet Rage. I forget the author off the top of my head, but I will link it in the description. And that sort of was, I guess, in the realm of more self-help, or, it would definitely be in that section of the shop if you went, or the library. And it sort of talked a lot about overcoming the inherent kind of shame or guilt that's associated with growing up queer in a heterosexual, focused world, which is, that's not conjecture, that is facts. We're all aware that the world is set up to operate on very particular lines that are all kind of understood by us as social cues and morals, ethics, so on and so forth. And then, when you're sort of growing up and finding yourself at odds with some of those parameters, the book argued that actually what accrues is gay shame. And a shame about your own identity that can manifest later down the line in your responses to a variety of experiences. So I was intrigued by that. I think that's really interesting. Now I've got a tea today. I'm a betrayer. I've got a Pepsi Max Cherry. I'm treating myself because it's November. So in this book, that's kind of where we're starting off from. And Will Young sort of chronicles his life. He sort of starts it's fairly chronologically arranged. He starts off with his sort of revelation of becoming aware of things about his sexuality that are different, quote unquote. The first chapter's charming. It's called Bobby Not Pam, which is about his being attracted to, or in whatever way that manifests in young children, as being attracted to Bobby Ewing, not Pam, on is it Dallas? I think it's Dallas, isn't it? The Dallas Dynasty. And then he sort of moves forward into growing up gay in the 80s, obviously the shadow of Section 28 and the AIDS HIV crisis, and the press essentially witch hunting queer people. He then goes on to talk about his education. Now, he went to prep school and private school, I believe. I think it's boarding school, was it? And then on to university at Exeter. And then he sort of talks about trying to find a community and finding it quite difficult. And then there's his pop idol journey. And then he later goes on to talk about the fact that he had a breakdown and how he dealt with that. And then there's some stuff about therapy that he went through. So it's really comprehensive, and it's a very open and honest kind of raw look at his personal experiences. And he traces a lot of those, what he calls, not my words, destructive behaviours to this sort of inner sense of shame around his identity. And I think it's really, really interesting. He makes a lot of really salient points about the fact that actually the residue of shame isn't always recognised as shame, but it kind of manifests in behaviours and like conditioned responses that you don't always realise that you're parroting. I'll give you an example. So there's one he talks about, which is holding hands with his partner in public, for instance, and being really hyper aware of people around you or what environment you're in as to whether it's safe, you know, which is something I can certainly relate to. I think I'm quite bolshy in many ways, and I think I always was in terms of being very open about my sexuality. I came out when I was 14. Not that I'm claiming that that makes me better or, you know, or in any way, shape or form, but I did have a very strong sense of myself and, you know, a really big kind of social justice, this is not my issue, this is your issue kind of attitude, even as a teenager. So, but, you know, that doesn't necessarily follow that I don't understand that, because I think there are, you know, oftentimes we talk about code switching and things like that, and I think I do it a lot less now, but I'm still hyper aware of it. You know, there are certain environments where I probably wouldn't grab my partner's hand or, you know, embrace someone in the street, kiss them, so on and so forth, where I'd alter my behaviours, tone them down. And I do sort of recognise that as being those little particles of shame. And, you know, it's a paradoxical shame, because I know intellectually that I have no reason to bear shame. Yeah? But it's a bit like almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess, in one respect, but also it's also about being a product of where you grew up. Like, I look around now and I think, you know, these young people that you see that are openly queer, that are still teenagers, young teenagers, even preteens, so on and so forth. And I think, wow, you know, what a different experience, you know, because when I was growing up, obviously, and Will talks about this in the book as well, you know, the age of consent wasn't equal, it's still at 21. There were no real protections in law, there was all the stigma around HIV and AIDS. You know, there were people using blatantly homophobic, queerphobic language in TV and the newspapers, unchecked by anybody, because that was just fine, that's what it was. You know, there was Section 28 in schools, so you couldn't even talk about it. And I thought, oh yeah, no marriage rights, there was no, you know, sort of, you could still be kicked out of the armed forces. You know, there weren't really any proper protections in place. Hate crime legislation, nope. And, you know, whether you recognise that you've absorbed that or you just absorb it by osmosis and it just becomes part of your worldview it's kind of irrelevant. It's there, irrespective. You know, and it's sort of, you know, it runs deep. And I don't think that these young people these days, I'm not saying it's easier now, necessarily. What I'm saying is that I don't think they have that as well. You know, which is brilliant. I'm so happy about that they're able to grow up in an environment where it's, well, you know, people will challenge things on the street, or, you know, I was on a train I was going to say a few weeks ago then, I think it was about a year ago, pre-coronavirus, and there was this guy sat in front of me, and this other guy got up, and the guy who was sat in front of me started, you know, I can't remember how it came about, but he was being very homophobic to this guy, and then all these people from the rest of the carriage just stood up and had a go at this guy spouting this homophobic language, and I was like, wow, that doesn't feel like something that would have happened 5-10 years ago, you know what I mean? It's a different world, and part of me, and do you know what the worst part is of that? I'll be really honest, I didn't, and I really wanted to confront this person I don't know, something stopped me, and I think it was the sense of weird self-preservation that means that obviously I haven't dealt with those residuals. Those tiny little bits. I mean, not in my day-to-day life. I'm very open, out and proud, and I believe it's important. I will hold hands with people in public, you know, in situations where, in increasingly more situations, in terms of, because I think I have a responsibility as a slightly older gay man now to be visible to younger people. And to show them that it's completely and absolutely normal, and that they should expect to see queer couples in public, and that anybody who disagrees with that is wrong. You know, and there's a bit that where Will sort of draws attention to this, and he's very brave in this. He's done some sort of work, and then he talks about an encounter he has on the high street with 3 homophobic young men. I won't ruin it, but basically he does something that draws attention to the subject, and then people rally to his defence. And he talks about how surprised he was about that, and I was also, as I say in that story, pleasantly surprised. And I kick myself afterwards that, like, why didn't I wade in as well? Because I think a small part of me still thought I actually have something to lose, because although I can't guess the sexuality of the people that were on that train carriage, you know, when there are insults and things could turn violent, you have to bear in mind that if that turns on you, you know, I am this person. If that violence is directed against me, it is directly because of this. And, you know, that's very much, I think, growing up at that time, as confident as I am in my sexuality now, for the most part, there's always a threat of violence, or an anticipation of a threat of violence that runs through your daily experience. So even if it's subconscious that you're constantly going, is this safe? Is this okay? Can I be this queer here? Can I be this loud and open? And that's, you know, I think what Will's talking about in the book. There's a speech by a fantastic drag entertainer called Panty Bliss, who did a speech at the Abbey Theatre in Dublin after a performance, and she talked about how she'd been at the pedestrian crossing once, and somebody drove past her, stood there, and shouted some kind of homophobic abuse. I can't remember exactly what it was now, which particular word. They're all abhorrent. But her first thought was, how did they know? And from then on, she talked about checking herself when she got to the pedestrian crossing. Is there a particular way that I held my body? Is my, you know, my physical self showing people things? You know, is it the way I walk? So on and so forth. And, you know, I do still relate to that, particularly, you know, in acting and so on and so forth. Like, I used to constantly overanalyze myself. Did I do that scene too queerly? Am I believably straight? You know, stupid things. Not completely stupid, because the industry does do that to you, but I'm hopefully doing a more kind of work and thinking on myself now, and sort of getting rid of that and going, so what if you were? So what if you were the most screaming queen in the world? Which, I mean, is kind of ironic, isn't it? Because I'm a drag queen as well. I'm literally a visual representation of what many people associate with queerness, visibly, loudly. I might as well be a walking rainbow on occasion. But it's just so interesting how insidious shame can be, and how much it can, you know, really, really take root, and you don't even realise until your body responds for you. So I think that's fascinating. So, yeah, that was a lot about me, I realised that, but I think that's some of the thinking that I was doing around reading this, and, you know, reflecting. So I think this is a worthwhile book. I think it's, and this is not meant as a criticism, I think it's an entry-level book to these thoughts and, you know, concepts, like, sociologically speaking. And that's no bad thing. because, you know, this is Will's memoir. Will can be as deep or as whatever as he wants to be. That's absolutely his call. And he, you know, I think probably more people will read this than if it was, you know, a more academic or self-helpy kind of text where it would feel more targeted towards gay men specifically. So I do think that at certain points I had to kind of stop myself. I was like, I want you to go deeper here into this. Let's examine this more closely, you know, because he touches on a lot of topics, things about some interesting stuff about gay sensibility and like ideas around camp and stuff like that, which I am really interested in as well, because I think camp gets misused a lot by people who actually mean effeminate, which is not what camp is. But then I have to remind myself that he's writing a personal memoir, and what it means to him is what he's going to put on the page. You know, this is not a university text or anything like that. So that's my issue. He does some really interesting stuff around, as I mentioned before, trying to find a community. And maybe I would have liked more here, I think, a bit more dissection of the queer community, because although a massive proportion of it is very supportive, obviously depending on who you choose to surround yourself with, I do think we have a community problem that has yet to be resolved with these residuals of shame that we haven't quite dealt with in terms of how our behaviours manifest. And he does sort of mention the old top-bottom dichotomy in, you know, relating to gay, male-identifying gay sex and stuff, and, you know, the way that people stick to those strict hierarchies of what those sexual roles are supposed to mean, and also the presumption, can I just say as well, that everybody who identifies as gay is having that kind of sex. That's a dangerous presumption to put on anybody, you know, and it comes from a place of stereotype that's been placed on the community that we've absorbed as the community. So it's almost like we're self-policing by doing that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having anal sex. What I'm saying is it's not the bottom line, or it shouldn't be a presumption that everybody is having the same kind of sex, because that to me is just as damaging a stereotype as, you know, some of the stuff that we hear negatively about queer people. He talks a lot about, you know, it's really interesting when he talks about his kind of experience with the PR team and how he came out in the press and so on and so forth, and how he was kind of being hounded and how the PR team dealt with that. That was really, really fascinating. And he does talk about bits where he wishes that he'd been, I guess he might say, more of an activist or more engaged and more able to say these things, but also he was a victim of circumstance, you know, and, you know, what could be said and how open you could be and how radical you could be. I mean, I still remember applying for jobs and, you know, I'd worked somewhere that had lesbian and queer in the title, and I used to alter the name of it in case I didn't get an interview, because that felt like a real potential deal breaker. And although I don't feel particularly proud of that now, at the time I did what I thought was right, and you know, that's just what it is, and I wouldn't do it again. But thank goodness the world has moved on, you know. Some good stuff about schooling here. What's really interesting, I mean, Will had a really sort of very specific experience. I mean, everybody's experience is specific, isn't it, as opposed to generic. But, you know, he went to private school, you know, that's a very kind of specific environment to be queer in, and I think it is different. I think the weird presumption is, and he does mention this when he talks about, you know, certain people that he expects to receive homophobic abuse from and then doesn't, and then people that he doesn't expect to receive abuse from, or, you know, poor treatment that he does. And I think there's this weird expectation that, you know, working class people, for instance, you know me, I always bring everything back to class because it's true, that working class people will have issues with sexuality and so on and so forth, and that, you know, sort of more upper class people or middle class people, whatever, are going to be okay with it. When actually I've often found the reverse is true, which is really, really nice. And that's another structure that exists in place, isn't it? That we uphold with our own thoughts without actually interrogating what that means and if it's even true. So, we're talking wheels within wheels here. Scratch homophobia, you'll find classism, sexism, racism, they don't exist in vacuums. So, and the final bit I want to talk about is just, because I don't want to ruin this whole thing for you, is stuff that he talked about with his own dealing with destructive behaviours. He talks a lot about addiction and addictive personalities and stuff, and it's really, really fascinating because he talks about porn addiction and love addiction and addiction to buying things, so on and so forth, which he sort of draws this body dysmorphia and obsession with looks and stuff, and it all kind of has a similar root, doesn't it? Because if we buy into that concept of gay shame being weird in a world that is not weird, leads you to kind of interrogate everything about yourself that makes you not fit in. So you would become obsessed. It makes perfect sense to me that you would become obsessed with, trying to embody this perfect ideal of what you are, of what you could be, and then you sort of come into a community, which again, as I've said before, has its issues. It's, as every community does, with, appearance and so on and so forth, and how we're sold what gay men look like. So, it's sort of out of the frying pan into the fire in some respects, isn't it? And, sometimes, he sort of comes to this breakthrough that these are all ways of making up for that kind of hole of shame, sort of like trying to paper over the cracks with other things because he wasn't happy in and of himself because he hasn't resolved those issues yet. So that was really, really fascinating, and, I think that could potentially be really helpful. Which is not to say that this is a self-help manual. As I've said before, this is absolutely a memoir, and this is Will's experience, which is why I don't think it's a negative that he didn't go deeper with certain things, because that's his prerogative. I can want things as a reader from the author, but the author is not obligated to give them to me, So I think this is an important text, and I hope that a lot more people read it than might have read it had it been, kind of more scholarly or whatever. So, yeah. Wow, that was a lot. That is longer than normal, isn't it? I do hope I haven't bored you there talking on about myself. Does it smell good? Yes, it smells good. Just got to check. But, that's a conversation I wanted to have. I haven't covered everything, obviously, because that's not what this channel is, but just some thoughts there about how I related to this and why I think it's a useful read. So there we go, the first of my non-fiction Novembers. Phew. Dry throat now. I hope you're doing okay wherever you are and staying safe and staying well. And if you're not well, I hope you're getting better. And if you are well, stay well. And all that. So let me know if you've got any recommendations for non-fiction November, or just generally what you've been reading at the moment, as the nights are drawing in, and can't believe it's 10 o'clock already. So yes, that's where we are today. Do sound off, because I love to read your comments and I love to chat back to you, all of you. Much appreciate you. The Lauriers, even you, yes. Okay, so that's it for today. So the library is now officially closed for the time being. So put that library card somewhere safe, especially in this wet weather. Otherwise it'll get all dirty and tacky and it'll melt in the rain. It won't melt in the rain, that's not a thing at all. Okay, my darlings, you stay safe and I will see you in the next video. Mwah.